The vast, frozen expanse of Antarctica stretches endlessly under a pale, sunless sky. The wind howls like a living thing, carving jagged ridges into the ice. In this lifeless void, humanity's presence is reduced to a single research station, Outpost Sigma 7, a cluster of modular buildings clinging to survival against the relentless cold. Inside, the station hums with quiet tension. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a glaciologist with a sharp mind and a haunted past, monitors seismic readouts on a flickering screen. The data is erratic, pulses of energy emanating from deep beneath the ice, far below where any natural geological activity should exist. At first, she assumes it's a glitch, but when satellite analyst Mark Chen pulls up thermal imaging, the truth becomes undeniable. Beneath 3 miles of solid ice, something massive is buried. The shape is too symmetrical to be natural, a sprawling geometric structure, its edges too precise, its dimensions too calculated. The team debates possibilities: a meteorite, a secret military bunker from the Cold War, but the depth rules out human construction. This thing is old, older than recorded history. When they cross-reference with declassified geological surveys, they find whispers of this anomaly in old Soviet and U.S. files, blacked-out reports, expeditions that never returned. Whatever this is, someone knew, and someone wanted it buried. Then, the signal changes. A new frequency pulses through the ice, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The station's power flickers. For a brief, terrifying moment, the entire continent seems to vibrate. The team exchanges silent glances. They've just stumbled upon the greatest discovery in human history, or its greatest mistake. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence. The research station, once buzzing with nervous energy, now felt like the calm before the plunge. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the briefing table, her fingers tracing the satellite images of the anomaly, a jagged, unnatural silhouette buried beneath miles of ice. Around her, the newly assembled team studied the data with a mix of skepticism and awe. Colonel Daniel Hayes, a hardened special ops veteran with frost in his beard and ice in his stare, had arrived with a military escort. His orders were simple: secure the discovery, assess the threat, and contain any fallout. Beside him, Dr. Henrik Sorensen, a paleobiologist with a reputation for chasing myths, argued that this could be the remnants of a lost civilization, something older than humanity itself. The tension between them was palpable. Hayes saw a potential weapon. Sorensen saw a relic of untold history. The drilling team, led by gruff engineer Rafe Dalton, had already begun assembling the thermal bore. "This ain't like digging for oil," he muttered, adjusting the rig's plasma cutters. "That deep? That cold?" The ice fights back. As the convoy of snowcats and modified snow crawlers set out across the wasteland, the horizon swallowed them whole. The journey was brutal. Whiteout winds, hidden crevasses, and a gnawing sense that they were being watched. Radios crackled with interference. GPS signals drifted. More than once, Elena caught herself looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see something following in their tracks. When they finally reached the coordinates, the ice stretched before them, pristine and untouched. But beneath their feet, something waited. The drill's whine split the air as it bit into the frozen crust. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, a hollow echo. The team froze. The bore had hit open space. Hayes tightened his grip on his rifle. "We're in." Elena peered into the dark, gaping maw of the shaft. A rush of stale metallic air wafted up, air that hadn't breathed in millennia. The ice had kept its secrets, but not for much longer. The drill platform shuddered violently as the last layers of ancient ice gave way. A plume of supercooled vapor erupted from the borehole, swirling around the team like ghostly fingers trying to push them back. The steel cables groaned under tension as the elevator cage began its descent into the newly revealed abyss. Elena tightened her grip on the safety rail, her parka's fur trim crusted with ice crystals that glittered in the floodlights. The air grew denser with each passing meter, carrying a metallic tang that made her tongue feel too large for her mouth. The temperature gauge on her wrist display plummeted past any reasonable extreme, yet paradoxically, the deeper they went, the less the cold seemed to bite. At 300 meters down, the ice walls transitioned suddenly to a smooth, obsidian-like surface that swallowed their light greedily. Chen's Geiger counter began clicking erratically, though the radiation badges remained stubbornly green. The walls here weren't carved. They appeared to have been formed through some process that left the material flowing like liquid before freezing in perfect geometric planes. When the cage finally touched bottom, the silence was absolute. Their boots crunched on a fine black powder that coated the tunnel floor. Not ice, not rock, but something that glittered like crushed stars when light hit it at certain angles. The passage ahead sloped downward at a precise 15-degree angle, the walls etched with spiraling grooves that pulsed faintly with a bioluminescent glow. Hayes ordered point, his rifle's tactical light revealing disturbing details in the walls, shadows of elongated figures suspended in the material, their limbs twisted in impossible configurations. The air hummed now with a subsonic vibration that made their teeth ache and their vision blur at the edges. At the tunnel's end yawned a cavernous space that defied all laws of physics. A massive inverted ziggurat hung suspended from the ceiling by tendrils of the same black material, its surfaces crawling with those same eerie glyphs that seemed to rearrange themselves when viewed peripherally. The floor was a mosaic of interlocking geometric shapes that shifted subtly underfoot, as if the entire structure was breathing. When Dalton's boot triggered an unseen mechanism, the chamber erupted in light. The glyphs blazed to life, projecting holographic images of celestial alignments that made Sorensen gasp. But as the projections cycled faster, the images grew more disturbing, towering spires of flesh and metal, screaming faces frozen in the black material, and finally, a massive obsidian seal cracking open to reveal. The vision cut out abruptly as the floor began vibrating. From the walls, from the ceiling, from the very air itself came a sound like 1,000 voices whispering just below the threshold of comprehension. The black powder at their feet began swirling into intricate patterns, as if pulled by invisible currents. Then the first of the shadows detached itself from the wall. The chamber pulsed with a sickly, rhythmic glow as the glyphs flared brighter with each passing second. The air itself seemed to vibrate, thick with an electric charge that raised the hairs on Elena's arms. The black powder beneath their boots swirled in unnatural patterns, as though alive, forming spirals that led toward the central monolith. Sorensen staggered forward, his face illuminated by the flickering symbols. "It's responding to us," he whispered, half in awe, half in terror. His breath fogged in the freezing air, but the temperature was rising, fast. Frost melted in jagged tears down the walls, revealing more of the smooth alien material beneath. Then the humming began, not from the walls, not from the machines, from below. A deep, resonant tone shuddered through the chamber, vibrating in their bones, in their teeth. The floor trembled, and for a heart-stopping moment, Elena thought the entire structure would collapse. But it wasn't collapsing. It was opening. With a sound like cracking ice, fissures split the ground in precise lines, forming a perfect circle around the monolith. The slab of black material descended slowly, revealing a yawning shaft beneath. A gust of stale, metallic air rushed upward, carrying with it something worse than decay, something organic, wet, and wrong. Hayes raised his rifle, his voice tight. "Fall back! Now!" But it was too late. From the darkness below, something stirred. At first, it was just movement, shadows shifting where no light reached. Then came the sound, a wet, clicking noise, like bones scraping against chitin. The team's flashlights flickered, their beams cutting through the rising mist to reveal a shape, pale, elongated, moving. It unfolded from the pit with impossible grace, its limbs too long, its joints bending in ways that made Elena's stomach lurch. The thing had no face, just smooth, featureless flesh stretched tight over a skull that wasn't human. Then it turned toward them, and the screaming started. The creature moved without sound, its elongated limbs slicing through the frozen air like blades. Corporal Vasquez, young, twitchy, the least experienced of Hayes's unit, was the first to break. His scream tore through the chamber as he opened fire, the muzzle flashes strobing against the walls in jagged bursts. The bullet struck the thing's torso, punching wet holes into its pallid flesh. But there was no blood. Only a thick, black ichor that bubbled forth before the wounds sealed shut. The creature didn't flinch. It turned its smooth, eyeless face toward Vasquez, and then it rippled. One moment it stood 10 feet away. The next, its clawed fingers were buried in Vasquez's chest. The soldier gasped, his rifle clattering to the ground as the thing lifted him effortlessly, his boots dangling above the frost-covered floor. The team watched in paralyzed horror as the creature's other hand rose to Vasquez's face, not to strike, but to caress, its fingers elongating like melting wax as they slid over his cheeks, into his mouth, his nostrils, then pulled. Vasquez's body convulsed violently before his skin split like overripe fruit, peeling away in wet ribbons as something inside him, something that was not organs, burst forth in a tangle of glistening tendrils. His remains collapsed to the ground in a steaming heap, but the thing that had been inside him now writhed in the air, drawn toward the creature like iron to a magnet. The chamber lights flickered wildly as the monstrosity absorbed the wriggling mass, its form shuddering, growing, becoming more defined, more human. Hayes was the first to snap out of the trance. "Fall back to the shaft!" he roared, shoving Elena toward the exit. But as they turned to flee, the walls around them began to weep. Thick droplets of the same black ichor oozed from the glyphs, pooling on the floor before rising into trembling, quicksilver shapes, each one slowly stretching into a familiar, horrifying silhouette. Vasquez's face stared back at them from a dozen forming figures, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. The surviving members of the expedition stumbled into a circular chamber deep within the structure, their breath ragged, their faces streaked with frost and blood. The walls here were different, covered not in alien glyphs, but in something far more horrifying. Human handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the black material as if the substance had been soft once, malleable. Some were small, child-sized. Others were twisted, the fingers elongated in agony. And at the center of the room stood a massive obsidian monolith, its surface swirling with images that shifted like liquid nightmares. Elena's flashlight trembled in her grip as she stepped closer. The monolith wasn't just showing images, it was reacting to their presence. The swirling darkness coalesced into scenes from the past, a prehistoric Antarctica, lush and green, dotted with towering spires of an advanced civilization. A ritual, figures in flowing robes dragging screaming victims toward an open pit. The first breach, a writhing black mass surging from the depths, consuming everything in its path. The last act of desperation, the survivors sealing the horror beneath miles of ice, knowing it would one day wake again. Sorensen's voice was barely a whisper. It's not a tomb. It's a prison. Hayes's jaw clenched, and we just broke it open. The monolith's surface rippled once more, revealing the final truth. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was a hive, a collective consciousness that absorbed, assimilated, and remembered every living thing it consumed. The figures they had seen trapped in the walls weren't victims. They were lures, echoes of the dead used to draw in fresh prey. As if on cue, the chamber's entrance sealed shut behind them with a wet, organic squelch. From the darkness beyond the monolith, a dozen smooth, featureless faces turned toward them in perfect unison. And then the whispering began. In Vasquez's voice, "You shouldn't have come down here." The whispering voices of the dead still clung to the air like cobwebs as Hayes slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. The chamber had become a living tomb, walls pulsing with unnatural rhythm, the Vasquez thing's words slithering between the survivors in a grotesque parody of human speech. Elena's hands shook as she frantically scanned the monolith's surface, searching for some clue, some weakness in the structure's nightmarish design. Then she saw it. A pattern in the glyphs, a repeating sequence that matched the seismic pulses they'd detected on the surface. "It's a network," she breathed. "These chambers, they're all connected. There's another way out." A guttural clicking noise echoed from the tunnel behind them. The creatures were coming. Dalton didn't hesitate. He jammed a block of C4 against the chamber's western wall. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion tore through the ancient material with a sound like shattering bone, revealing a yawning passage beyond, one that sloped upward, toward the surface. They ran through a nightmare gallery of frozen figures, their flashlight beams catching glimpses of half-assimilated faces screaming silently from the walls. The air grew thicker with each step, the tunnel walls contracting and expanding like living tissue. Behind them, the scraping of chitinous limbs on stone grew louder, closer. Chen fell first. One moment he was sprinting beside Elena, the next his leg vanished into the floor as the black material liquefied beneath him. His scream was cut short as the substance surged over his head, swallowing him whole. The last thing they saw was his hand, outstretched, fingers splayed, before it too was dragged under. The floor solidified instantly after, leaving no trace he'd ever existed. The exit loomed ahead, a jagged crack in the ice where the alien structure met Antarctica's natural geology. Hayes turned to cover their retreat, his rifle spitting fire into the advancing darkness. The bullets did nothing. The creatures kept coming. Then Sorensen did the unthinkable. With a howl of defiance, he ripped the remaining explosives from Dalton's pack and charged back toward the horde. "Go!" was all he had time to shout before the detonation lit up the tunnel in a hellish orange glow. The concussion wave sent Elena sprawling into daylight, where the howling Antarctic wind felt like paradise against her skin. As Hayes dragged her to her feet, the ground beneath them trembled. Not from another explosion, but from something bigger moving deep below. The ice sheet groaned in protest as massive fractures spiderwebbed outward from their escape point. They'd made it out. But as Elena looked back at the collapsing tunnel, one terrible truth became clear. They hadn't stopped anything. The thing beneath the ice was awake now, and it was hungry. The rescue helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, whipping the snow into frenzied spirals as it descended toward the blood-stained ice. Elena collapsed against the skid, her body numb with more than just cold. Behind them, the research station was gone, swallowed by a yawning crevasse that hadn't existed yesterday. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, demanding answers Hayes couldn't give. Then the ice screamed. Not a metaphor, a physical, ear-splitting shriek of fracturing glaciers as the entire shelf convulsed. The helicopter banked violently as a mile-long fissure raced across the white expanse below. And in that blackened wound, something glistened. Elena pressed her face to the freezing window as the structure, no, the organism, began to emerge. Towering spires of black chitin pierced the surface, unfolding like some grotesque flower blooming in fast forward. The radio erupted with panicked voices from McMurdo Station as their seismographs flatlined from the activity. Hayes grabbed the pilot's shoulder. "Climb! For God's sake, climb!" As the chopper lurched upward, the last thing Elena saw was the ice sheet breathing, rising and falling in a rhythmic living motion. And beneath the translucent crust, shadows moved. Not dozens, thousands. The final transmission from Antarctica crackled through the speakers before the radio died completely. A distorted voice that might have been Sorensen's whispering, "It's learning." Then static, fade to black. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.